Hello, everyone. Welcome. We are here today to talk about reading. We are in Chapter 8 of Foundations for Teaching English Language Learners by Wayne E. Wright. So this is an extremely important topic, and we will get started. Reading is one of the most important skills that students learn at schools. All teachers are responsible for helping English learners develop proficiency in reading. So our English learners face a tremendous challenge of learning to read in a language that is new to them, and they are expected to learn academic content through reading. So we have to be very knowledgeable of how to support our students when it comes to learning reading skills. So our first guiding question is, what is a balanced approach to literacy instruction? Since the 1980s, there's been the reading wars that have raged on, focusing on two different arguments. One is a holistic top-down approach to teaching reading, and others that favor, on the other hand, a bottom-up skills-based approach. So on the left side, those who take the holistic approach recognize that reading is highly complex and multifaceted, favoring instructional programs that begin by immersing students in authentic texts that become familiar with meaningful contexts. And you see this triangle that we start with the story and then we build down to understand phonics. And then on the right, those who take a skills-based approach argue that students must first learn sounds and letters and use them to decode words, and then sentences before they can go on to reading the extended text of paragraphs and books. So this, of course, can work well for native English speakers, but we know through our conversations that we need a holistic approach for our English learners. So this approach of balanced literacy recognizes the need for direct instruction in reading skills, but emphasizes the importance of providing instruction in meaningful contexts to ensure that students comprehend and use what they read for authentic purposes. This emphasis on meaning and comprehension makes balanced literacy approaches particularly important for our English learners. A balanced approach does recognize that phonics is part of this, but just one component of learning to read, and that teachers, not scripted curricula, should determine which students need direct instruction on specific phonics skills. Phonics can be taught in a meaningful context created by reading accessible books, singing songs, doing chants, and reading poems. Once students are familiar with a text, it can be used for instruction in phonics and other reading skills. Most skills can be built out into mini lessons, which are brief, about 10 minutes, but explicit, and should focus only on those letter-sound relationships or other skills that students are not picking up naturally. A balanced literacy approach also includes the use of home language to support reading instruction, learning, and assessment. So some criticisms of phonics programs for English learners are that programs were not developed with English learners in mind and thus fail to address their unique linguistic and academic needs. Programs often force English learners to learn how to decode words before they even know the meaning of those words. Students who use these programs often emerge being able to decode, but are unable to comprehend what they read. So use of these programs takes time away from the types of ESL and literacy instruction that English learners need to develop literacy skills in English. Our next guiding question is, how does reading promote English language development? So reading is an excellent source of comprehensible input and enhances English language development. Unlike oral English, students have an unlimited number of opportunities to encounter written English. So students have a greater control over what they read than what they hear. They can choose the topic that they're reading and the level of difficulty of the text that they read. If they don't understand something, they can go back and reread. They can take time to figure out the meaning of new words and structures by looking up words in the dictionary, asking a teacher or friend, or figuring out the meaning from context. Also, they will encounter words, phrases, and structures that are unlikely to occur in spoken English. So our next guiding question, what does research tell us about the effective reading instruction for English learners? So if you recall our last session about speaking and listening, we heard from 3 extensive reviews of scientific literature on language and literacy instruction for English learners. The NLP report, Center for Research on Education and Diversity and Excellence, or CREDE report, and the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine report. So these reports also include the following findings related to reading development and instruction. The first is literacy instruction approaches for mainstream students are not sufficient for English learners. So despite similarities in English literacy development for proficient speakers and for English learners, the process for English learners is more complicated. English oral development is critical for English literacy development beyond the word level skills. So English learners often learn how to decode words, but have trouble comprehending what they read because of the lack of attention to their oral English language development. Students with well-developed oral skills in English achieve greater success in English reading than students with less developed skills. So we have to be mindful to continue practicing that oral language alongside of practicing reading. Literacy instruction must be combined with high-quality ESL education. So for English learners to develop strong English literacy skills, high-quality literacy instruction must be combined with early, ongoing, and extensive oral English development. Oral proficiency and literacy in the first language is an advantage for literacy development in English. So home language and literacy skills can be transferred to support English literacy development. Individual differences contribute significantly to English literacy development. So these individual differences, such as general language proficiency, age, English oral proficiency, cognitive abilities, previous learning, and similarities and differences between the home language and English will have an impact on each student's literacy development. This finding underlies the importance of teachers knowing each of their students individually so they can adequately address their unique linguistic and academic needs during literacy instruction. Most literacy assessments do a poor job of gauging English learners' strengths and weaknesses. This poses the question, are tests of letter naming and phonological awareness in English good predictors of English reading performance? Home language experiences can have a positive impact on literacy achievement. So students perform better when they read or use material in the language they know best. Reading materials reflective of the students' cultures appears to facilitate comprehension. This evidence provides support for bilingual approaches that build on the linguistic and cultural funds of knowledge that students bring to school, and it provides support for the use of multicultural literature. Parents of English learners are often able and willing to help their children achieve academic success, but conclude that schools typically underestimate and underutilize parents' interests and potential contributions. Effective literacy instruction for English learners provides direct instruction and interactive learning environments. The research recommends direct instruction because it ensures that students can master skills that are often embedded in even obscured and complex literacy or academic tasks. It also suggests interaction because it provides a context in which teachers can modify literacy instruction to accommodate students' individual differences and preferences. Some additional recommendations of best practices for reading instruction include providing explicit instruction in literacy components, screening for language and literacy challenges and monitoring progress, developing reading and writing abilities of English learners through text-based analytic instruction using a cognitive strategies approach, providing direct and explicit comprehension strategy instruction, providing opportunities for extended discussion of text meaning and interpretation, and finally, fostering student motivation and engagement in literacy learning. Our next guiding question, how can state college and career readiness content standards and English language development standards from WIDA and our state guide reading instruction for English learners? So there's been a major shift for English language arts and literacy, and our Common Core state standards emphasize 3 major shifts for language arts and literacy. So the first is building knowledge through content-rich nonfiction. The standards call for a 50-50 balance between informational reading and literary reading in K-5, with increased focus on informational reading in grades 6 to 12 across the content areas, up to 75%, including an increased use of literacy nonfiction in language arts courses. Reading, writing, and speaking grounded in evidence from text, both literary and informational, is called out in the standards. So the standards emphasize the importance of students being able to answer text-dependent questions and to make effective arguments and give detailed information orally and in writing based on text that they have read carefully, rather than relying alone on their prior experience. Also, the standards call out regular practice with complex text and its academic language. So this emphasizes increasing levels of text complexity with the goal of preparing students to read and comprehend the types of complex text they will encounter in college and in their careers. The standard includes a focus on developing academic vocabulary. So the standards also set an expectation for students to read increasingly difficult text that can be described as a staircase of text complexity. And this is described in a three-part model. Qualitative dimensions. So these are the aspects of text complexity best measured by an attentive human reader, such as levels of meaning or purpose, structure, language conventionality, and clarity, and also knowledge demands. The second is quantitative dimensions. So these are the aspects of text complexity, such as word length or frequency, sentence length, and text cohesion. For example, the standards use Lexile ranges starting from 450 to 790 for grades 2 and 3, and extending to 1200 to 1300 for grade 11 and college and career ready. Finally, reader and task considerations. So variables specific to particular readers, such as motivation, knowledge, and experience, and to particular tasks, such as purpose and the complexity of the task assigned and the questions posed, with teachers employing their professional judgment, experience, and knowledge of their students and the subject. English learners can and should move up the staircase of text complexity by starting with a step they are currently on. So teachers of English learners must carefully scaffold and guide the students through multiple readings of the text, using instructional conversations to discuss meaning, unpack information related to words, phrases, and clauses, and also make connections between meaning and structure. Teachers of English learners must be cautious not to interpret this standards for grade level complex text to mean that students should attempt to read text only at these levels. That limitation would greatly frustrate students and turn them off to reading. Rather, these texts mark the goal for English learners and other students to achieve. Thus, some use of grade level complex text may be acceptable with a substantial amount of careful scaffolds. So English learners need a balanced approach to literacy instruction that integrates reading, writing, listening, and speaking, all of our language domains, that teaches reading skills and strategies within a context of meaningful, authentic communication, and that is differentiated to meet the needs of diverse language and literacy needs in the class. So teachers need to understand that English learners' reading strengths and challenges will affect what they're able to do. So we need to be clear about our instruction and, as a result, what the students are expected to do. Teachers need to understand the role of home language as well as the role of oral language in English in reading development. So reading is one of the primary means by which English learners acquire new vocabulary. This process can be described as a reciprocal causation. So reading comprehension supports vocabulary development, and vocabulary development supports reading comprehension. Most of the time, students can determine the meaning of unknown words through a context of a sentence or paragraph. They must read enough challenging books that contain unknown words to be exposed to a wide variety of new words. Teachers can analyze texts beforehand to describe which words a student may need to know or have assistance in reading, and which may require extra assistance or warrant direct instruction. Any text at or above the student's instructional level will have a wide range of unknown words, and thus teachers must be selective in determining the words worth teaching. So here is an instructional sequence for vocabulary growth that we can look at. So before reading the text, it's possible to introduce and explain 1 to 3 meanings of critical words to comprehend the book. Then read the selection without stopping. Next, immediately after the first reading of the text, teach 4 or 5 word meanings. Reread the text sentences with the target word. Briefly explain the word's meaning as it applies to the context of the selection, and continue reading the selection. So throughout the week, the subsequent readings of the text, teach 4 or 5 new word meanings using the same process as previously. Discuss the comprehension aspects of the selection. Review words that were taught along with explanations of the new words, and use printed versions of the words to play word games and do sentence building activities. And the last reading at the end of the week, review each word taught during the week by using each word in a new sentence not taken from the book. Review the explanation of each meaning. Our next guiding question is, how can understanding of English learners' reading strengths and needs inform a teacher's choices of instructional approaches, methods, and strategies? So, identifying English learners' reading levels is important in order to provide appropriate texts and reading instruction. Doing so can be challenging because English learners are often at different ages with different levels of literacy in their home language and have different levels of English language development. The framework used to identify reading levels in schools are designed for students who already speak English and who are learning to read in the elementary grades. So proficient English-speaking students typically begin at the emergent level in kindergarten and reach the fluency level by 2nd or 3rd grade. For English learners, these grade level correspondences may not be relevant because newcomer English learners arrive in a U.S. school at all grade levels. English learners at lower English language development levels are unlikely to surpass the emergent and early levels of English literacy development in the early days because their English is not yet sufficient for them to understand what they're reading, even if they are able to correctly decode each word in the text. So when we're thinking about selecting texts, students need to access a wide range of texts across the content areas about different topics and different genres at different complexity levels, including authentic fiction, so children and youth literature, and nonfiction informational texts. These are the types of books and texts that you find in children's libraries and bookstores. Teachers should select texts from students to read that support specific instructional purposes, but student choice is also extremely important. Reading is an entry point for addressing goals of multicultural education, such as recognizing and valuing students' home cultures, helping students learn about other cultures, and preparing them to live and work in a diverse society. Students need books that can reflect their culture and the features of characters that they can relate to. So when we think about structuring activities, teachers can use the before, during, and after, or BDA structure to create activities around the reading of any text in a content area. Before reading a text, effective teachers help their students to activate prior knowledge, survey or preview the text before reading it, and pre-teach essential vocabulary necessary to comprehend the story. During reading, effective teachers model reading strategies, helping students to learn new vocabulary and grammatical forms, and help readers make connections between the text at hand and other texts that they have read or experiences that they've had. And after reading, effective teachers help readers consolidate, elaborate, and deepen their understanding of the text and the connections that they've made to provide and review further instruction for new vocabulary and grammatical forms. One helpful way of conceptualizing reading instruction in the ESL classroom is to look at reading in 3 forms: reading to, reading with, and reading by English learners. All 3 are essential to be happening. While these forms are common in elementary school classrooms, they are also just as important at the secondary level for providing explicit teaching in reading skills. So now let's talk about 4 different reading strategies: read aloud, shared reading, guided reading, and independent reading. So first, what is a read aloud? Sessions in which the teacher reads a book or other text to one or more students are called read alouds. The teacher reads a text to students while stopping, occasionally and purposely thinking aloud. So it allows students to negotiate meaning alongside the teacher. The teacher shares pictures with the students. Reading aloud is one of the most important things that we can do to help English learners read. Read alouds gives students access to text beyond their current level of ability. It provides students with authentic reading from a reader who is more proficient than they are. Read alouds include big books, picture books, chapter books, nonfiction, poetry, and brochures. And it is part of the I do and the gradual release of responsibility. So it is teacher-led. So some benefits of read alouds is that it is very, very important because many of our students are fortunate enough to come from print-rich homes, but others are not. So in the case that students have not had the experience of reading alongside of a family member, read alouds provide unlimited amount of opportunities for students to hear rich text being read aloud. So read alouds effectively expand students' language structures. It relaxes their mind and reduces stress. It highlights culture and interest. It grows their vocabulary. It creates more background knowledge, strengthens their comprehension. It explores various genres and literature. It inspires readers and writers, and it bonds and builds the community of learners. Next, let's look at what is shared reading. So shared reading is an example of reading with students. The focus is on using text closer to the student's reading ability and giving them time to read along. Shared reading provides teachers with the opportunity to teach important concepts of print, demonstrate strategies that good readers use, and involve students as a community of readers. Everyone reads together from the same text in a shared reading. The level of the reading instruction should be slightly higher than the student's current instructional level. So this is part of the we do and the gradual release of responsibility. So the teacher is doing it alongside of the students. So shared reading provides teachers with opportunities to teach important concepts of print, demonstrate strategies that good readers use, and involve students. For English learners at the beginning or emergent levels of reading, the text should contain rhyme and rhythm, as well as repetition of words, phrases, and sentence patterns. The illustrations should provide maximum support for understanding the text. For more advanced English learners, the text should be more closely resembling a grade level reading material, but also contain illustrations and other text features that help to facilitate their comprehension. Ideally, the text should match the current theme or topic of study that's happening in the classroom. Some shared reading connections for grades 6 to 12 is to start book clubs in the classroom. So creating opportunities for students to not only read what a teacher has chosen, but what a student has chosen and guide the reading. So you don't have to feel limited by paper copies of a book. You can ask students to download the Libby app and use their library cards. And if the students don't have a Carnegie Library card, they can apply for one online. So next, let's look at guided reading. Guided reading is conducted with small groups of students, about 3 to 6 students who read at the same instructional level. The purpose of guided reading is for students to practice reading through using skills and strategies that they've learned during the read alouds and in shared reading. The teacher meets with a group of students at the similar reading level. The teacher does not read the book to or with a student, but instead prepares them to read it on their own. Students have their own copies of the same text. So this is at their particular instructional level, which is defined as reading with 90 to 94% accuracy. And each student should be reading aloud on his or her own. The teacher serves as a coach, providing scaffolds as students need to apply the skills to read and make sense of the text. The goal of guided reading is to help students move to a higher instructional level and become independent readers with increasingly difficult texts. Again, this is part of the we do and the gradual responsibility. So as the teacher, I'm reading along with the students. So some suggestions for before, during, and after reading with guided reading is that before reading, teachers should carefully select and plan supportive introduction, noting any specific language features that may be essential in comprehending the text. So the introduction to the text should be used to familiarize students with vocabulary and language structures, drawing their attention to illustrations that help them to facilitate comprehension, and also give them time to think about what the book is about. During the reading, it's important to let students try on their own. Teachers can help with difficult words or point students to context clues that will help support them. Mainly, teachers should closely observe and identify vocabulary, intonation patterns, word pronunciations, and syntactic structures that students may struggle with. After reading, these observations inform the mini lessons, which could include work with sight words for beginning level students or tier 2 or 3 words for more advanced students. Teachers should also engage students in conversations and other activities that provide opportunities for the students to use new language and vocabulary that they've learned from reading. And lastly, what is independent reading? So the purpose of reading to and with students is to get them to the point that they can successfully engage in independent reading. Students read individually from books they've self-selected, holding their own copies of the text to read silently or in a whisper voice. Students need to be provided time every day to read independently. Younger students need about 10 to 15 minutes, while older students can do longer, 20 minutes or more. Although students should be given open access to reading any material in the classroom, they also need to be guided to make appropriate choices. So for students, if there are 5 words you don't know, choose another book. Finally, this is part of the you do and the gradual release of responsibility. So the student is doing this work independently. To be successful, students require an extensive inviting classroom library where students find books that they are genuinely interested in the topics and that are also appropriate to their reading level. Many teachers have found it helpful to organize their classroom libraries by theme or genre, which is how I have mine organized. Books and texts used for read aloud, shared readings, and guided reading should also be made available in the classroom library. So many schools use the term sustained silent reading, or SSR, and this is used to build students' stamina in reading. The use of SSR in classrooms for students of all ages can transform students into lifelong readers. It's recommended that SSR be a time to simply enjoy reading with minimal accountability. So some post-reading activities, the after part of BDA, is to help strengthen the students' comprehension of the text they just heard or read and to extend their learning beyond the text. So suggestions for post-reading activities include class discussions, using productive talk moves. A teacher leads a discussion designed to maximize students' comprehension of the text. A reader response. So teachers encourage students to reflect on and extend their understanding. Graphic organizers are used to help students break down a text in its essential components, such as the beginning, middle, and end chart. Class-made books. Students can draw pictures of their favorite parts of a story or how they might extend the story. They can also write alternative endings, another possibility to end the story. And they can also act out in readers' theater. So this is one of the most enjoyable ways that students show their comprehension of a story is to act out the story itself using strategies that promote oral development. So one classroom that I'm observing, the high schoolers are currently acting out Romeo and Juliet. And I can see that the comprehension is growing because they're able to see the words in action. Our next guiding question: how can teachers assess reading and use assessment results to guide instruction? So to help English learners improve their reading ability, teachers have to use formative assessment to continually monitor their reading. To ensure that students are receiving appropriate instruction, teachers cannot wait for the end results of high stakes testing or other summative assessments at the end of the year to inform how the students are doing. So a few important pieces of assessment. We look at the concepts of print for English learners. So English learners at any age at the emergent level of literacy, we need to understand from each student if they're able to understand the differences between letters and words and spaces. We need to know where to start reading and how to do a return sweep to continue reading to the next line. And we need to make sure that they understand the basic features of a book, such as the title, the front page, the back cover, and even how to hold a book properly and turn pages. So young English learners from homes with few books, or even older English learners who have lacked opportunities for formal education in their home country, may need to develop these concepts at school. English learners who are illiterate in their home language will transfer most of these concepts, but they will need to learn about any differences between print conventions in their home language and in English. So below are a few examples of differences that may exist between English and other writing systems. Some languages are read from right to left or top to bottom or both. The front and back covers of books in some languages are the opposite of what they are in English books, with reading proceeding from back to front. Some languages, of course, are not alphabetic, such as Chinese. Some alphabetic languages do not follow a strict left to right encoding sequence, with symbols written one or more levels above or below the main text or surrounding another symbol on both sides. And some languages do not add space between words, so you have to explicitly teach students how to create space between their words. The next tool is a running record, and this is an excellent tool for in-depth observation of a student's reading performance. So running records allow a teacher to quickly assess the student's strengths and areas in need of improvement. It enables the teacher to identify the types of errors the students make while reading. These errors reveal what is going on from the student's mind as the student makes an attempt to read the text. So to administer a running record, the teacher provides the student with a book judged to be at his current reading level. As the teacher reads, the student makes a series of specialized marks on a running record sheet, such as the one on the right. And after completing a running record, the teacher asks comprehension questions or asks the students to retell the story. This is a crucial component because it reveals whether the student was able to understood what he or she read. So once a running record has been completed, the number of words read correctly, total words minus the errors, is divided by the total number of words. This calculation provides a score that indicates the accuracy of the student's reading and indicates how appropriate the level of book is for reading instruction. So books at 95% accuracy or higher may be too easy for the student to use in guided reading. The sweet spot, books with 90 to 94% accuracy are considered to be at the student's instructional level or within the student's zone of proximal development. So the book is sufficiently challenging, and through guidance, the student is able to gain new reading knowledge and skills by reading from this book. Books read with 89% accuracy or less are considered to be at the frustration level and generally not appropriate to use in guided or independent reading. A running record score is a key tool for matching a student to appropriate books at their reading level. The student's performance and individual errors provide very valuable feedback. Finally, a reading self-assessment can be used for students to keep track of the use of their own strategies and to assess their ability to stay on track. So you'll see this example on the right is to be used during independent reading time. Note that this rubric is not just a self-assessment, but it makes explicit the teacher's expectations for students' behaviors and also the use of strategies that's important for the student not only to use in this classroom, but throughout their day. So I want to thank you for your engagement today. In the next class, we will be discussing writing. Remember to please contact me if you would like to discuss anything you're reading, writing about, or thinking. Thank you so much.